The notification lit up my phone just as I was about to leave work. Alert! Possible break-in detected. My stomach twisted. My house? Who would? I didn't even waste time thinking. I grabbed my bag, bolted out the door, and sped all the way home, heart pounding against my ribs. The moment I pulled up to the driveway, confusion turned to sheer disbelief. The locks. They'd been changed. I rattled the door handle, knocked, then banged my fist against the wood. Muffled voices drifted from inside. My pulse roared in my ears as I reached for my phone, ready to call the police, when suddenly, the door creaked open. Carson. My stepfather. He leaned against the frame with an expression that made my blood boil, self-righteous, smug. You need to stay out, he said, arms crossed. Consider this your punishment. For a moment, I just stared. Excuse me? He exhaled dramatically, as if explaining something to a child. You heard me. I forced out a laugh, though my hands clenched at my sides. Punishment for what, exactly? Carson smirked, tilting his head like he was enjoying a private joke. You tell me. I wanted to scream. Instead, I bit out, just say it. His eyes gleamed. Vanessa. The name alone sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through me. Vanessa, his insufferable, entitled daughter. The same girl who had waltzed into my housewarming party, insulted my home, and acted like she owned the place. Now she actually thought she did? Carson had the audacity to remind me of the disrespect I showed her at my own event, how I'd embarrassed her in front of everyone when I pointed out that if she could afford a better house, she wouldn't still be living in her parents' basement. Apparently, that had been the final straw. You had your chance to let her move in nicely, Carson continued, voice thick with condescension. Instead, you sent your mother home in tears. His expression darkened. So, we made the decision for you. Something inside me snapped. I laughed, because the alternative was screaming. You think you can just take my house? Carson shrugged, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world. Vanessa deserves this place more than you do. Then, before I could reply, he stepped back and slammed the door in my face. I stood frozen, staring at the closed door, heart hammering. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. But it was. I had two choices. I could stand there, hoping they'd magically come to their senses. Or I could do what I should have done from the start. I dialed 911. An hour later, flashing lights painted my street. Officers stood at my doorstep, while Carson and Vanessa sputtered in outrage as they were forced out, their belongings still half unpacked. Carson, in particular, looked stunned, like he hadn't truly believed I'd go through with it. But I had. And I didn't regret it. Not yet. The regret came later. Because an hour after they were gone, my phone rang. Mom! I braced myself, expecting rage. Screaming. But when I answered, her voice was quiet. Hollow. I can't believe you did this, she murmured. You should have called me. I would have fixed it. A lump rose in my throat. Mom, they took over my house. What was I supposed to do? Just let them stay? She didn't answer. I swallowed hard. I know you don't trust the police, but this was my home. I didn't have a choice. Silence. Then, so soft I barely heard it. I can't forgive you. My breath hitched. I won't speak to you again, she continued, voice unshaking. What you did is unforgivable. Click. The line went dead. For the first time that day, my hands trembled. Not from anger. Not even from relief. But because, deep down, I knew she meant it. And somehow, that hurt more than anything. The moment I pulled into my driveway, something felt off. The notification from my home security system had already set my nerves on edge, break-in detected. But now, standing in front of my own house, the feeling in my gut twisted into something uglier. I reached for the door handle out of instinct, but it didn't budge. Confused, I pulled harder. Then, I saw it, the lock had been changed. My stomach dropped. I could hear voices inside. Laughter. The scrape of furniture being moved. My heart pounded as I fumbled for my phone, ready to call the police. But before I could, the door swung open. Carson stood there, filling the doorway with a smug expression that made my blood boil. "You need to stay out," he announced, as if he had any right to tell me that. "This is your punishment." I blinked at him, stunned. "Punishment? For what exactly?" I asked, voice sharper than I intended. He gave a condescending chuckle. "I'm not going to spell it out for you. Think back. Maybe you'll figure it out." Then, as if I needed a clue, he smirked and said, "Something about a certain someone you disrespected at your little party." Vanessa. My jaw clenched as the memory came rushing back, her sneering at my home, flaunting a superiority she didn't earn. My perfectly reasonable clapback. And now, this? I stared at Carson, disbelief warring with rage. "You're seriously telling me that because I didn't roll out the red carpet for Vanessa, you decided to take over my house? Like this is some ridiculous game?" His smile widened. "You had your chance to do it the easy way. You could have let Vanessa stay willingly. Instead, you sent your mother home in tears. You forced this." I wanted to scream. Carson leaned against the doorframe, voice thick with mock sympathy. "And you're not going to do anything about it. We both know that." I crossed my arms. "Oh? And why is that?" He scoffed, shaking his head as if I were a child who simply didn't understand the rules. "Because if you do, your mother will never forgive you." That one hit deep. "She won't ever speak to you again," he added, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "And you know why." I did know why. My mother's history with the police was complicated, painful. She refused to call them, even when she should have. But was I really supposed to just let this happen? Let these people take over my home like squatters while I stood outside like a fool? Carson must have seen the war in my expression because he delivered his final blow with a smirk. "Vanessa deserves this house more than you do, anyway." Then, without another word, he shut the door in my face. The click of the lock was deafening. For a moment, I just stood there, fists trembling at my sides. I inhaled sharply, exhaled through gritted teeth. Then, I made my decision. I called the police. Within an hour, they were dragging Carson and Vanessa out of my house. Vanessa had barely finished unpacking her bags. Carson, for all his bravado, looked like he'd swallowed a lemon when the cops showed up. He never thought I'd actually do it. But I did. And I knew there would be consequences. I got my house back, but in return, I lost something else. My mother. A call that changed everything. She didn't yell. That was the worst part. When she called me, finally, it wasn't with the fire and fury I expected. It wasn't even anger. It was disappointment. She sounded hollow. "If you didn't want Vanessa to stay with you," she said quietly, "you could have just called me. I would have handled it." I swallowed hard. "Mom, they broke into my house. What was I supposed to do?" She exhaled, long and tired. "Not this. Not the police. You know what they mean to me." Her voice wavered at the end, and something inside me cracked. I knew what they meant to her. I knew because of him. Her ex-boyfriend, the cop who shattered her self-worth, isolated her, left her with nothing but a goodbye letter and a wound so deep that even now, she couldn't bring herself to trust any officer, no matter the circumstance. I'd reopened that wound. And she couldn't forgive me for it. "This isn't something I can forget," she murmured. "Or get past." I felt the words before she even said them, like a blade poised against my throat. "I don't think we should talk anymore." Then the line went dead. And just like that, she was gone. Aftermath. 2 weeks. That's how long it's been since I've heard her voice. Meanwhile, Vanessa has been posting pictures of her, Carson, and my mother on some sunlit beach, captioned "Just a fam recovering." Recovering from what? I was the one whose house was invaded. I was the one locked out of my own home. I was the one forced to make an impossible choice. And yet, I'm the villain. I talked to my dad about it. He told me I did the right thing. He even mentioned that before my housewarming party, my mother had gone to him for help finding Vanessa a place to live. She knew Vanessa needed somewhere to stay, and yet, instead of figuring something out like a reasonable person, she just decided to make me the solution. She never made those kinds of allowances for me. When I struggled, I was told to be independent. When I needed support, I was told to figure it out. But for Vanessa, she gets my mother's full devotion. And that realization hurts more than anything. The last attempt. A friend let me know that Vanessa and my mother are back in town. I know what I have to do. I have to talk to her. She blocked me on social media, but not on my phone. So I'm going to call. My dad says I should wait a few days, but I can't. If I don't do it now, I might lose my nerve. Because if she doesn't pick up, if she ignores me completely, then that's it. That's the end. And I don't know if I can handle that. The call that broke me. She picked up. For half an hour, I talked, and she listened. I told her everything, about Carson, about Vanessa, about how it felt to stand outside my own house, locked out like a stranger. I told her about the betrayal. The hurt. The feeling that she'd chosen them over me. She said nothing. Then, finally, she spoke. Let's meet in person. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if I was ready for what came next. Everything I said in the previous updates, I laid it all out for her. Because more than anyone else, she needed to hear it. Not you, not strangers on the internet. Her. I think deep down, I was hoping for some kind of reaction, some argument, some anger. Instead, she just listened. And when I was done, she said she understood where I was coming from. That she wished she had been a better mother the first time around. I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't even ask what she meant. Not yet. I want to save something for our meeting tomorrow. We're having lunch, and I already know it's going to be tense. Awkward. Maybe she'll be fine, but I won't be. The idea of sitting across from her, trying to bridge this impossible gap, makes my stomach twist. Every time we talk, something goes wrong. Ever since she married Carson, it's like an invisible countdown starts the second we speak, ticking down to some inevitable disaster. And so far, I haven't been wrong. I just hope tomorrow isn't another explosion waiting to happen. Update 5. I'm on my way home from lunch. I should be heading back to work, but I can't. I feel drained, hollowed out. I just want to go home, pour a glass of wine, and stare at the ceiling until this awful weight in my chest fades. The conversation didn't go the way I expected. It wasn't bad. We settled things, in a way. But the ending was the same. It feels like a breakup, but worse, because it's not some fleeting boyfriend trading me in for someone younger, prettier. It's my own mother, choosing someone else over me. It started off fine. We hugged, made small talk, and for a moment, it felt normal. But as soon as we got into it, all the bitterness, all the jealousy, came surging to the surface. I told her everything I had held back for years. That I wished she had been the mother to me that she now was to Vanessa. That it made no sense, Vanessa is an adult. I was a child when I needed her most. And she wasn't there. I told her I deserved better. That it was heartbreaking to watch her become this different person for her new family when she couldn't do the same for me. She didn't interrupt. She just sat there, eyes welling with tears, as I let it all out. And once I started, I couldn't stop. Who knew when I'd get another chance to tell her the truth? When I was done, she sighed, like the weight of it all had finally settled on her shoulders. And then she told me the truth, her truth. She admitted she had failed me. That she should have tried harder. But back then, she had just wanted to live. My parents married young, forced into it by their families, and then she had me before she was ready. When she divorced my dad, she finally felt like she had control over her life, and she clung to it. She thought I could handle myself. And if she was being honest, she had mentally checked out long before the divorce even happened. It was selfish. She knew that. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't following someone else's expectations, she was doing what she wanted. And now, years later, she finally felt ready to be a mother. Just, not to me. To Vanessa. To her new family. She told me I was right, she should have been better. But it was too late. And just when I thought we were making progress, when I thought maybe we could start over, she pulled the rug out from under me. She said we shouldn't talk for a while. That we both had too much going on in our lives, and we needed space. That some time apart would help us come back stronger. I knew what that really meant. It wasn't about space. It was about Carson and Vanessa. They didn't like me being in the picture, and she had made her choice. Again. I shouldn't have been surprised. But I was. I had hoped, stupidly, that maybe this time, she would finally fight for me. That after everything, she would choose me, just once. But she didn't. And now I know she never will. I should be used to this disappointment by now. I really should. But somehow, this one still hurts.